When I talk about the ultimate life and love in all things, I am speaking about the ultimate reality, and I wouldn't want anyone to think that I dismiss or diminish the suffering and pain that does exist in this world, in human experience. And the plight of the ego, separated from soul and injured, held in a place of such pain and suffering. Because this is a reality in this world, and although the ultimate reality is one of love, and that love and life does exist as a seed in all things, the plight of the ego experience can be one of terrible suffering, and it can cause terrible suffering and injury to others. And I wouldn't want anyone to think that I either do not perceive that or diminish the reality of that in human experience. Because in human experience there is incredible suffering and what we would call evil. Things that we would not even want to speak of because of the horror of them. And I recently was contemplating this situation, this plight, when the ego is cut off from the soul and what that does to or can do to an individual. And I was thinking about the incredible emptiness and coldness and hollowness of those individuals who have lost touch with their soul, and especially those who have unfortunately been deeply injured as ego minds and are not connected to the healing depth of the spirit. I was thinking how cold that reality seems, how empty. And it occurred to me that it's like this void, this no man's land of psycho-spiritual reality, this sort of purgatory of empty pain and horror that an ego experience can fall into. I was thinking how an ego which is healthy, and what I mean by that is that a psychology which develops within a healthy and relatively caring environment, which might be shallow but is in an animal, purely psychological sense, does provide the support and the affection that is required for the healthy development of a psychology. When an ego, even if that individual is not in touch with their spirit, when it develops in this healthy environment, then even if it is a shallow ego experience, it can still function well, and it is not held in pain because there is enough positivity and enjoyment in the animal experience that allows that individual to be shallow and yet to still experience their human ego self with a certain amount of pleasure and happiness. And then there are those who are happy and also more in touch with their spirit, and there are those who are deeply injured. The ego that is very injured and in pain, yet that injury might even drive it to deepen its experience and to get in touch with the foundational reality of the soul, the most authentic self that lies beneath and upholds our human personality and ego. And that person, that individual, that experience is one where there is pain, where there is suffering, but the ego self, the human personality, is able to find meaning and even happiness and heal because of the uplifting power of the spirit. So when an ego is injured and the person, that injured person, reaches deep and goes inward and seeks that infinite healing power of God and of the soul, then that person goes from the linear plane, existing here on this, let's say, flat linear plane, existing here, And say if you're healthy, you're here and you're happy, even if you're shallow, and then you're deeply injured, and so you go deep, you go down into the depths within, and that rises up and it provides even the injured ego personality to find meaning and ultimately a peace that can be a sort of happiness. But it's the ego that is deeply injured and in pain that, for whatever reason, does not move into the healing power and depth and color of the spirit, that ends up in this sort of in-between purgatory of pain and suffering. So if you imagine this is the depth beneath, then it would be caught somewhere here underneath in this terrible shadow of pain, in emptiness, unable to be embodied in the ego experience because of all the scars and pain and suffering, or walls, blocks, and yet still, for whatever reason, not willing to descend or rise into the deeper experience of the spirit. And that would be the individual, to one degree or another, that can become cut off from feeling and thus able to enact deeds of true destruction and horror in this world. But of course we have to have compassion for such an individual. Yet we also do have to recognize that in this world and in this human experience, there is incredible degrees of suffering and pain. Yet still, that truth holds true, that within every aspect of life there is a seed of truth and love and life, the seed of the soul, the seed of the soul. And I think as we gain consciousness and as we understand that ultimate sea of love and consciousness, loving consciousness that upholds all existence, and the seed of that in all things, then even though we can recognize the tragedy and the deep sorrow and the pain and the suffering and the horror that can be an experience in this human realm, in the ego realm, we also understand that ultimately life transcends that. Life transcends what we call evil, what we would understand to be evil. And that's why when I write about this and speak about this, I say how evil is an aspect of awakening. Evil, the denial of life, the schism from life, the schism from feeling, and authentic relationship to self, others, and God. That schism does not exist where consciousness is at a high enough level. The levels of true consciousness see clearly what life is, and so no being, no matter how much power they desire, will embark upon that pattern of destruction and control and limitation, because any being that reaches a high enough level of consciousness will understand that there is no way to get true power or pleasure or experience from this pattern, from this direction. So, two things that I was seeking to clarify in this brief talk is, one, that I do not diminish the suffering of the human condition, and I believe that I look at it with open eyes, but that the reality of that suffering and the ability for the ego experience to be trapped in incredible levels of pain and separation from feeling and spirit and love, that reality, that ego reality, does not change the fact, the truth, the ultimate truth, that all of this and all life is ultimately held in that sea of infinite love and truly awakened consciousness that cannot be diminished or dimmed by any pain or suffering, that is ultimately transitory and ephemeral. So we must hold both these things in our minds, and as we awaken, we can hold both these things in our minds, and our vision of this ultimate truth and the peace that it brings to us does actually allow us, as I've said before, to be far more engaged and active in a positive sense in this world and in this life and in this human experience. So it's important to realize that true spirituality does not remove us from the play of human experience. The soul embodies itself in this human experience, embodies itself and fulfills the true, authentic human experience, and makes us present and makes us engaged in a loving and powerful way.